And welcome back to Day 9 Daily number 356, where we learn to be a better gamer. We're looking at Idra versus Efli, and in the brief break between parts 1 and 2, someone was asking, well, isn't this opening from Efli, isn't this scoutable? Absolutely. It's really easily scoutable. I mean, people in the chat were saying, like, oh, Overlords could easily walk in. Even more easily, you just walk a Zergling up and see that there's Zealots slowly starting to stockpile. But this is not a strategy that is about the element of surprise. In fact, very few strategies are about the element of surprise. They're about the element of timing. So, what makes this so strong is actually, let's just look at the condition Idra's in. Idra actually built literally as many drones as he could before building barely enough to be able to hold this push off. What else would Idra have looked at that would have changed his game plan? Sure, someone could say something like, well, he just builds a roach warren and builds 7 roaches and crushes that. Sure, he could have done that. Well, why doesn't he just build 2 spine crawlers at each location and then uses queens and composition and good building placement to wall it off? Yeah, sure, he could have done that. But the point is that whether he's surprised, whether he is prepared, it all buys you time as the Protoss player. And we see 2 Stargates going down right now for Efli, which might seem slightly unusual, but this is going to be the second move that Efli does to really start shoving hard and giving more control to himself throughout the game. And now Idra can sort of comfortably go back to powering, but notice that only recently was Idra actually able to make those drones. The probe count from Efli has been constant, just constantly producing. Now we're making a ton more gateways. And I want you to just briefly envision what you think is a normal-looking Protoss mid-game, like Stalkers and Colossus, something like just general gateway units, Zealot, Stalker, Archon, Templar. I want you to just envision that briefly, and just keep that tucked away in the back of your head for a brief moment. This is obviously very unusual to see Efli doing, or see any Protoss really transitioning into 2-gate Stargate, going Phoenix like this. So notice that Idra's lair has only just now finished. And because of the time that Efli bought, he knows that this Hydralisk Den is either not going to be down right now, or he will have done a lot of damage early with his Zealots. Only one of those two can really be possible. So now we see some Spore Crawlers coming up in a big way. Can't just get away with 1 or 2 Spores and some Hydras, because Phoenixes are incredible against Hydralisks. And this, in my eyes, is the big power move that we're seeing Efli do in this game, is this huge amount of Phoenixes. And again, I cannot emphasize enough, Phoenixes are incredible against Hydralisks. Absolutely incredible. So we're seeing Efli, he's going to poke around, he's going to try to pick off some Overlords. Idra already has speed, Idra looking so good. And it's a time like this when someone might say, well, he's just not doing that much damage. I mean, we're seeing a little bit more damage get dealt there by Efli, and I mean, look at that, 67 drones. I mean, look at the production. We already see drop coming in up there, Ventral Sacks. We see the range coming in, speed for roaches. He already has +1. I think that by a lot of measures, one would say that Idra is at an advantage. And what did Elfi's push really do? But again, it's not the size of Elfi's army that's the big one. It's the fact that he's actually controlling the behavior of Idra in this game. What else can Idra do but make a bunch of Hydralisks at this point in time? This kind of ends up working very well with these Zealots at the start of the game. You're making your opponent over-focus on ground. He would do something like build too many roaches, build too many spines, build too many lings. Idra built very little of any anti-ground, but still enough that Idra is still kind of committed to making a lot of Hydralisks at this point in time. Now, there is a Warp Prism going down right now, and I guess I don't want to talk too much about that right now. The big thing is these Phoenixes that are controlling up a lot of space, and this very, very crazy move that we are going to see Efli do, where he literally makes almost only Zealots. So we have these Efli moving around with the Phoenixes, and Idra actually is going to slowly lose control of the center of the map, just via vision. Every time we see one Hydralisk just kind of out in the middle of nowhere, Elfie can kill it off. Sure, he walked by that one, but he's really trying to kill off these Hydralisks. Look at the control that the Phoenixes give. I think 2 Stargate Phoenix is actually one of the best control plays that you can do in StarCraft 2. You just shut down the map hard. And now this War Prism has way more freedom to go where it pleases. More spine crawlers being produced by Idra. Really cool stuff. And now this ends up happening. What the hell is this about, right? Doesn't that seem messed up? Huh? Like, doesn't that seem a little weird to see, what is that? 17 Zealots, 1 Stalker, 1 Sentry. Cool. This is, I think, it's the 3 steps that I really like. The 2-gate Zealot pressure, and then the 2 Stargate Phoenix pressure, and then this 7-gate mass zealoting type thing. Because each one follows up on some exploit or some vulnerability it created. A lot of people will look at the Phoenixes and say, ha ha ha, he's locking down the map with Phoenixes, I guess I'll build those too. But that's not all of it. He builds the Zealots at the start of the game, forcing the Zerg to overcompensate via ground and not be good enough against air. And then he's going to use the Phoenixes and build them in such high numbers that the Zerg is committed to making the more expensive Hydralisk to be able to deal with this huge air force, which allows the Zealot army to do another huge timing attack, knowing that the opponent really cannot have that many roaches. Very, very cool. Very cool to see. We're not seeing any of the usual mid-game. We're not seeing any sort of Colossus. We're not seeing any sort of usual Stalker mix. The Hydros are getting picked up a ton. And here come in a ridiculous amount of Zealots and 1 Stalker that is doing his Dragoon impersonation. Good job, buddy. Good job. Now, in the unit counting station, oopsie daisies, don't want to show that yet. In the unit counting station, we see, look at that, only 6 roaches. A ton of Zealots. A lot of time was bought there by Elfie to get up 8 gateways. He doesn't really have that many other tech options, but if you envision any tech, really, if you throw down a Twilight Council to get some sort of later tech with Blink, or if you just do the more obvious throw down the Colossus Den, Zerg is in kind of an atrocious position. And because Zerg is far away from his 3rd, he has to leave the safety and comfort of all these Spore Crawlers that are so beautifully positioned back home. These Phoenixes have largely just been used to lift up the Hydralisks, and now we have these Roaches trying to retreat, and Elfie is just demolishing. This is a nice little advantage that these Overlords were here, and a lot of people will say, oh, well, he got the advantage because he just killed off Overlords. But come to the Units Lost tab with me. That's pretty incredible. To have only built Zealots and Phoenixes and to have done this much damage, with Idris still doing quite well, just financially. I mean, he has the 72 drones. He has all the big upgrades that he wants. He's almost done with +2. Elfie just has some 1-1 Zealots. But by controlling his game flow, he sort of made this work. And now is just waltzing right on up here and is doing ridiculous damage. As an added bonus, he gets to kill off all these Overlords. And the Roaches try to spring up. Well, Roaches are not amazing. Our Phoenixes are not amazing against Roaches. But still, we can do enough damage there. And in the Units Lost tab, we see that Idra is just getting pretty severely hurt. Now, I still don't want you to view this as a 1-2-3 punch finishing blow. This move buys us time to get up our 3rd base, to get up all these tech structures. We have this robotics bay here. And this is something that I want you to train yourself to do, is to not view big attacks like this, or actually any attack, as a, I hope I did damage. And did damage ends up being this sort of vague, non-clear phrase. Buying time for yourself is the big advantage that these little pokes and prods do. But it's important that you note what kind of time you're buying. The early Zealot pressure at the start, it buys you time to get up a strong air force. It's not just time in general, because, again, make it specific. Know exactly what you're working with. If you did a 2-gate Zealot rush, did it buy you time to do a follow-up Zealot rush? Not really. He built up ground defense for the first Zealot push, and therefore he's going to have enough ground defense already set up for your follow-up zealot push. In fact, you lose time if you're trying to do a follow-up push with that ground play. Or, for instance, if you... What's another example? If... Because I'm trying to think of something where you can follow up with the same kind of pressure again. Oh yeah, like if you open up with a really fast Void Ray. What's the best way to do it? There are some pushes that exist where you can do... here's a really good one. Here's a really, really good example. So what I've been saying so far is that you do a ground push, and it ends up buying you time to do some more air pressure because Idra's behind on his air defense, which then buys you more time to do some ground pressure. And it sounds like the alternation is what's key. I want you to just be aware that you can do some ground pressure that allows you to have stronger ground pressure following it up. The simplest one is 3-gate Zealot Sentry into a 5-gate push. You can do 3-gate Zealot Sentry, expand, get 2 more gateways, and just do a push. That's the ground pressure you want to do. If you identify your opponent has delayed his gas, you can push with your first Zealot and first Sentry and do a little bit of damage and then come right back home. Hell, you can move out with your first Zealot and your first 4 Sentries, do a little damage and come back home, and it strengthens that follow-up push because he has to make a lot of defenses that aren't going to be useful for quite a long time because he needs the economy to be able to deal with that follow-up push. So here, the alternation between air and ground it is buying Elfi a lot of time, and in that last push, he is now getting up his 3rd expansion really comfortably. And this little move that Idra does, where he tries to sneak in with a lot of his roaches, is one of these classic mistakes that ends up happening a lot when you are doing a very big control build. Your opponent just goes, ah, crap, I'm in an uncomfortable situation, and then he just goes in for the kill. The positioning that the Phoenixes give you, if we actually come and look at the Idra cam, amazingly, Idra has these 2 watchtowers. I think that Elfi just needs to walk to them and kill them off. But I mean, other than those watchtowers, Idra has 1 spotter here, 1 spotter here, and that's basically it for his vision on the map. The Phoenixes lock that down. And look at this. Elfi wasting minerals here. He is not actually going to do that much damage with these. He's going to lose them. But he's again buying himself time to establish his 3rd base. And with a pretty reliable series of attacks, where Elfi is going very, very Phoenix heavy, he's going to be able to establish this 3rd. He has his Colossus coming up. He has his range. Idra trying to... loading some guys up into an Overlord that promptly ends up falling. And note how uncomfortable this is for Idra. He's going to have to keep building a lot of Hydralisks. Like, a lot of Hydralisks. And all Elfi is going to do is he's going to keep trying to draw the Hydralisks out by doing stuff with this Warp Prism. And even if none of that ends up happening, look at the way that he has secured up this 3rd base. And everything's just looking really, really solid. Super control build. In the unit station, we see there's not actually that many ground units in overall existence for Elfi, right? He has 12 Stalkers, he has 1 Colossus. This unit's loss tab can be a little bit deceiving. Because this might make you say something like, oh yeah, well, Elfi is way in the lead. I mean, if we come to this Army Supply tab, though, note that it's very, very even still. Our Protoss player actually had to do a lot of crazy roundaboutedness to get into this situation. And weirdly enough, the biggest issue that you'll always have if you're going for a control style build is that you'll just have a smaller basic ground army. You want a big army to be able to go off and just kill shit in a very ultra incredibly normal way, but you won't really have that with a control build. You'll have small, cute compositions that kind of need to be controlled correctly. And I think that this is really, really awesome stuff by our good friend Elfi. Terrans actually have some stuff like this as well. For instance, in Terran vs. Protoss, having 2-port Banshee openings with Cloak, great way to pin your opponent back. Great way to skew his compositions around. You end up with a smaller amount of Marines and Marauders. And I'm sure a lot of you Terran players are saying, why do I need to build Banshees when I can just build EMPs? And the truth of the matter is that it's important that you just are aware of these funky little timings that you can end up putting yourself in. Now, before we go to break, just briefly note the game state that we are in right now. Remember that Stalker Colossus Force? Remember how in part 1 I said just keep in mind what a usual Protoss mid-game looks like? Well, hey, Elfie has it right here. And look at that. In the back corner of his base, he's going for Blink. Fantastic, nominal. He has got himself set up nice and good. It's not non-stop harassment that is the key. There were 4 clear, discrete pieces. And I don't mean discrete as in subtle. I mean 4 different chunks. Let's actually look at them very briefly before the break. At the 6-minute mark, I guess it's at the 8-minute mark, yeah. It was this Zealot push. So the Zealot push was the first big element. The second big element, as we come to the 12-minute mark, was these Phoenixes. It was this transition. The third one was this big Zealot push. And the fourth one, and I think this is the easiest one to overlook, is this Warp Prism right here. I think we'll actually have to come back to 14 minutes to see it. But there was the huge push, and I want you just to look once again at the minimap. There's the expand coming up. Here is the push dying. And Elfie suddenly is under a little bit of pressure. But this Warp Prism, with an undefended third, how do we buy time to get our third up? With this exact one play. A lot of people will watch this game and say, oh man, Elfie was doing a ton of great stuff with Warp Prism Harass all game long. This has been the only warp that we have seen, and it was very clearly used to help defend this push, or defend this expansion. I mean, we have, what, 8 Stalkers here. Yeesh. Our Colossus is not done yet. But hey, he's got to deal with this, and he has got to deal with this. Great move. We're going to come back to a 16-minute mark. We're going to take a brief break. And when we come back, we're going to wrap it up and take some questions, and it's going to be awesome. It's going to be good.